In this video, I'm going to generate the half angle identities. The first one I'm going to do is cosine half angle identity. I'm going to start actually with one of our double angle identities, which is cosine of 2 theta equals 2 cosine squared theta minus 1. I'm going to introduce a new variable u, and we're going to let u equal 2 theta, and then it would follow that u divided by 2 would be equal to theta. I'm going to make a substitution now into that double angle identity. I'm going to call this cosine of u equals 2 cosine squared of u over 2 minus 1. I'm going to rewrite this on the right here to do the other type of notation for squaring a trig function. So I'm going to do the whole thing squared written like that, equals cosine of u. Now my goal would be to isolate the cosine of u over 2. So I'm going to start by adding the 1 to both sides. And now I will divide by 2 on both sides. And finally, I will take the square root of both sides. And at the same time, I'm going to move that 1, put that in the front so that it's real clear that the trig function, that only the u is going inside of that trig function. So that's going to be plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine of u divided by 2 is equal to cosine of u over 2. And that is the cosine half angle identity. Now, to generate the sine half angle identity, I'm going to start with this version of the cosine double angle identity, 1 minus 2 sine squared theta. Again, I'm going to introduce a new variable u. I'm going to let u equal 2 theta, and it would then follow that u divided by 2 would equal theta. When I make those substitutions, I'm going to have cosine of u equals 1 minus 2 sine squared of u over 2. I'm going to rewrite that, 1 minus 2, the whole quantity, sine of u over 2 squared, which is basically the same thing with this notation. We just tend to write it this way because it's a little bit easier. Now, I'm going to subtract the 1 from both sides, so I'll have cosine of u minus 1 equals negative 2 sine of u over 2, the whole thing squared, and I'll divide both sides by negative 2. You'll recall that if you have a denominator that's negative like this with just a monomial, you can take that negative and put it in the numerator, but you have to give it to everybody in the numerator. You have to give it to the cosine and to that negative 1. So in my next step, I'm also going to, well, let's just write this as negative cosine of u plus 1 divided by a positive 2 equals sine of u over 2, that whole thing squared, not being very consistent with my parentheses. And then finally, I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and at the same time, I'm going to switch these places. So again, I like my trig expression to be at the back of the expression. So it'll become 1 minus cosine of u, all divided by 2, and it's a plus or minus the square root of all of that is equal to sine of u over 2. And that is the sine half angle identity. Now, for the tangent half angle identity, I'm just going to let tangent is sine over cosine. So I'm going to do sine of u over 2 divided by cosine of u over 2. So the sine of u over 2, we're going to assume that we're in quadrant 1, so everything is positive. So it's going to be 1 minus cosine of u over 2, all of that divided by the square root of 1 plus the cosine of u, all divided by 2. We can split up these radicals and call this the square root of 1 minus cosine of u divided by the square root of 2, all of that divided by the square root of 1 plus cosine of u, all divided by the square root of 2. And of course, if you multiply by the reciprocal, you'll see that the square roots are gone. So now I'm going to have the square root of 1 minus cosine of u divided by the square root of 1 plus the cosine of u. Some folks might stop here, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to rationalize the denominator. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by 1 plus cosine of u over the square root of 1 plus cosine of u. Now in the numerator, I'm going to have the square root of 1 minus cosine squared of u, all divided by 1 plus cosine of u. You'll recall that 1 minus cosine squared, that's equal to sine squared. So this is the square root of sine squared of u, all divided by 1 plus cosine of u. And since we're in quadrant 1 and everything is positive, we know that the square root of sine squared is just going to be sine of u over 1 plus cosine of u. And I'm not going to stop here and multiply by the conjugate of the denominator, which is 1 minus cosine of u over 1 minus cosine of u. So in the numerator, we have sine of u times 1 minus cosine of u, all divided by 1 minus cosine squared of u. You can probably see where this is going, because that denominator is the same thing as sine squared of u. And now I can reduce that sine with one of those, and I have 1 minus cosine of u, all divided by sine of u. And that is the tangent half angle identity. I hope you enjoyed watching.